the infamous Tyburn Gallows, where justice was swift, public, and often brutal. For centuries, this site was the epicenter of punishment in London, a place where crime met its reckoning in the most dramatic fashion. Tyburn Gallows wasn't just an execution site. It was a stage where the government made an example of those who broke the law. But what made Tyburn so infamous? It wasn't just the executions, it was the methods, the spectacle, and the stories of those who met their fate here. Tyburn's history dates back to the 12th century when it first became a designated place for public executions. Located near modern-day Marble Arch in London, Tyburn quickly grew into the most notorious execution site in England. Its centerpiece was the Tyburn tree, a wooden structure with 3 beams arranged in a triangular shape. This design allowed multiple executions to take place simultaneously, a chilling efficiency for the time. Executions at Tyburn weren't just about punishment. They were events. People traveled from all over to witness these grim ceremonies, transforming the site into an odd mix of terror and entertainment. Vendors sold food and drinks, children played, and the crowd eagerly awaited the arrival of the condemned. But for the prisoners, the journey to Tyburn was anything but a festive occasion. After their sentencing, they were paraded through the streets in a cart, escorted by guards, and sometimes even jeering crowds. This last ride from Newgate Prison to Tyburn was a public display meant to shame the prisoner and warn others. Tyburn Gallows was more than just a place where the condemned met their fate. It was a public event, a macabre spectacle that drew massive crowds from all over London. Executions at Tyburn became part of the city's rhythm, like an eerie festival. For some, it was an opportunity to see justice done. For others, a chance to revel in the grim spectacle of human suffering. The condemned were led in a procession, often in the early morning hours, from Newgate Prison to Tyburn, a journey that could take hours. As the prisoners made their way to their final destination, they were paraded through the streets in an open cart, often shackled and guarded by soldiers. The crowds would gather along the way, sometimes throwing insults or curses at the prisoners, but occasionally offering sympathy or a few last coins for a drink, the so-called last pint tradition. This last ride was not only a public shaming of the condemned, but a way to further the spectacle. Some of the prisoners had committed heinous crimes and were seen as deserving of their fate, while others were victims of circumstance or simply caught in the harsh web of a merciless legal system. Upon arrival at Tyburn, the prisoner was readied for the execution. The large wooden structure known as the Tyburn tree was a central feature, with 3 upright beams symbolizing the 3 types of criminals who might be hung there: traitors, murderers, and thieves. The gallows were a simple structure but an unmistakable symbol of death and terror. In the final moments before the execution, the condemned were allowed to speak their last words. These were often defiant, angry, or even remorseful, depending on the individual. Prisoners would confess their sins, sometimes in a last attempt at redemption. Priests accompanying them would offer last rites, and for those who sought it, absolution. However, the spectacle went beyond just the condemned. The crowd's reaction was equally significant. Some watched silently, stunned by the horror of the public execution, while others cheered and jeered, finding morbid amusement in the suffering. There were no laws against mocking the condemned. Some found the events almost like a public holiday. But it was clear that these public executions were designed not only to punish, but to serve as stark reminders of the consequences of breaking the law. One example of this gruesome public display involved Jack Sheppard, a notorious highwayman in the early 18th century. Sheppard's execution was the event of the year, with large crowds gathering to witness the death of the man who had become a symbol of defiance against the authorities. Despite his rebellious spirit, Sheppard was hanged at Tyburn in 1724 after being convicted of numerous robberies. His death was a dramatic public event, and even though he had been a criminal, he still had the power to captivate and stir the public's emotions. The fascination with Sheppard, like many other criminals who met their end at Tyburn, wasn't just because of his crimes. It was the way he had almost become a legend, an enduring symbol of resistance to authority. For those who attended, the execution was both an end and a strange form of entertainment, a twisted carnival where justice and cruelty blurred together. One of the most infamous and horrific methods of execution at Tyburn was hanging, drawing, and quartering, a form of punishment reserved for those convicted of treason. This method was as harsh as it sounds. First, the condemned was hanged by the neck, until nearly dead. However, the goal was not quick death, it was to prolong the agony. After the hanging, the prisoner was cut down while still alive and often disemboweled in front of the public. The intestines were removed, and the person's body was cut open in a public display of punishment. The final act of this brutal execution was the dismemberment of the body being quartered. The body was divided into 4 parts, each sent to different parts of the kingdom, as a grim reminder of the consequences of betraying the crown. One of the most notorious individuals to suffer this fate was William Wallace, the Scottish rebel, whose death became symbolic of the extreme measures taken by the English to maintain control. Though Wallace was executed in 1305, before Tyburn's height, his fate echoed through the years as a reminder of the harsh justice that could be meted out at Tyburn. Unlike the relatively quick hangings we think of today, those at Tyburn were often designed to prolong the prisoner's suffering. The executioners would adjust the length of the rope, so the prisoner would slowly strangle to death, taking several minutes, sometimes even more. The public would watch as the prisoner fought for breath, and the agony of the struggle became part of the spectacle. Elizabeth Kelly, a well-known figure in the late 1600s, was executed at Tyburn in 1680 for allegedly attempting to poison King James II. She was hanged, though her execution was part of a larger political drama, and her slow death served as a brutal warning to anyone who might dare challenge the monarchy. Burning at the stake was another horrific punishment, typically reserved for those convicted of heresy or witchcraft. For these prisoners, death came slowly as the flames consumed their bodies. The public spectacle of a woman or man burning alive was meant to instill terror. It was a gruesome, fiery end for those who were accused of challenging religious or political order. Jane Wenham, often called the last witch to be hanged in England, was one such person burned alive in 1712. Though she was later posthumously exonerated, her burning marked the grim end of a sad chapter for women accused of witchcraft during the period. For those who refused to plead, the punishment was known as pressing, or peine forte et dure. This involved placing heavy weights or stones on the prisoner's chest, slowly crushing them under the immense pressure. The condemned person would eventually be unable to breathe, leading to suffocation. It was a punishment of pure agony, designed to break the will of the prisoner. One of the most famous cases of pressing involved Richard Roach, a man who refused to enter a plea. In 1697, he was pressed to death as he stubbornly remained silent. His tragic death highlighted the cruelty of the legal system of the time and the extreme measures taken to force a confession. Tyburn witnessed countless executions, but some stand out in history due to the stories surrounding the individuals who faced their final moments there. These executions not only captured the public's attention, but also became part of the folklore of Tyburn itself. The lives and deaths of these individuals painted a grim picture of the times, revealing the harshness of justice in 17th and 18th century England. One of the most infamous figures to meet his fate at Tyburn was Jack Sheppard, a notorious English thief and escapologist. Sheppard's death in 1724 captivated the public for years. He had been sentenced to hang for his role in a series of daring robberies, but what made him notorious was his ability to escape from prison multiple times before being recaptured. His exploits gained him a kind of folk hero status, and people from all over London came to see him hang. Sheppard's execution was a grand spectacle, drawing a huge crowd. Tyburn was also the site of many executions for those accused of witchcraft. These executions were a reflection of the era's deep superstitions and the fear of the supernatural. One of the most well-known cases was that of Elizabeth Sawyer, a woman accused of witchcraft in 1621. She was convicted and sentenced to be burned at the stake, a method that was particularly cruel and intended to destroy the evil within her. The execution drew large crowds, with many witnessing the spectacle of a woman burning alive, marking an era when fear and religion were intertwined to shape brutal punishments. Another infamous execution involved Grace Sherwood, who was accused of witchcraft and subjected to a trial by water, in which she was thrown into a river to see if she would sink or float. Both outcomes were seen as signs of guilt or innocence. She was eventually found guilty and sent to Tyburn to be executed. One of the more politically charged executions at Tyburn was that of Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, in 1745, was a popular military leader and one of Queen Elizabeth I's favorites, but his ambition led to his downfall. He was accused of treason after leading a failed rebellion against the Queen. His execution at Tyburn was a highly publicized event, as Devereux had once been a figure of power and prestige in the court. Despite his former status, Devereux was stripped of his titles and executed in front of a crowd that likely felt a mix of shock and fascination. By the early 19th century, the brutality and public nature of the executions at Tyburn were starting to fall out of favor. Public executions were gradually seen as barbaric and inhumane, especially as the rise of a more modern legal system began to take shape. In 1783, the use of Tyburn Gallows was officially abolished, and executions were moved to Newgate Prison, a more private and less theatrical setting. The move away from Tyburn marked the end of an era. The gradual reform of the criminal justice system reflected changing attitudes toward punishment, justice, and human rights. The idea of justice being a public spectacle gave way to a more private, subdued approach to capital punishment. In the years that followed, Tyburn was demolished, and the area was redeveloped into what is now Marble Arch, a landmark that now stands as a symbol of the changing times. While Tyburn is no longer a place of execution, its legacy remains a chilling reminder of the cruelty of the past and the evolution of justice. Tyburn Gallows may have been a place of death and suffering, but its history also serves as a reminder of the ways in which societies have used punishment to control and intimidate. The spectacle of public executions, though repulsive by modern standards, was once seen as necessary to maintain order and instill fear in the population. The individuals who met their fates at Tyburn, from thieves and traitors to the innocent accused of witchcraft, were not just part of a grim history. They were victims of a system that often placed spectacle over mercy. In some ways, they represent the darker side of human nature, a desire for retribution and a thirst for control, even at the expense of compassion. Tyburn Gallows, for all its brutality, also tells the story of how far society has come in terms of justice and human rights. While the methods of execution at Tyburn were undeniably cruel, the lessons learned from that time continue to shape our views on punishment and fairness today. The transition from public executions to more private methods of justice represents the growth of civilization, the slow but steady move toward recognizing the dignity of every individual, even in the face of crime. As we reflect on Tyburn's dark legacy, it serves as a stark reminder of how history shapes the present and how the choices we make today will influence future generations. Tyburn Gallows may no longer stand, but its impact still echoes in the pages of history.